You've heard the phrase, you can't love someone else unless you love yourself. But have you ever really thought about what that means? In this episode, we're diving deep into the connection between how you relate to yourself and how that shapes your relationship with others. We'll uncover how distortions in self-esteem, whether it's feeling superior or inferior, can sabotage intimacy and keep you from building healthy connections. Get ready to map out where you stand and discover how to break free from the patterns preventing you from experiencing true intimacy in your relationship. Up next on Master Your Marriage.
Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful tools, I think, that we teach. And I hope it becomes one of the most valuable tools in your relationship toolbox.
Going to be awesome.
We're going to give you a map for understanding all of your reactive behaviors and the strategies that you fall back on when things just aren't going your way.
Oh, buddy.
And this map is also going to be able to help you to better understand your partner's reactive behaviors as well.
So what you're saying is you're going to give me a map to understand the woman in my life?
Yeah.
Oh, that's gold. Let's do that.
You're still working on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm still working on the map. That's sort of just been a sandhill with an X on it. Like maybe
maybe this will help.
Okay, good. Well, more importantly, we're going to introduce you to a new way of thinking about your relationship, which is not just day to day as we think about it, but rather minute by minute or moment by moment. Because the truth is, the real work in relationship happens moment to moment as we constantly evaluate where we are on this map.
And this actually ties back so much to what we talked about last week, the adaptive child that is within each and every one of us. And so if you recall, we talked about this really important question that we all need to be constantly asking, which is, who's driving the bus? Is it your mature, wise adult self who is operating from your prefrontal cortex? Or is it the adaptive child who learned these survival strategies to protect themselves?
And if you remember, we don't want the 5-year-old driving the bus.
We don't want the 5-year-old taking out the fire hydrants.
Yeah, not at all. So remember, the adaptive child has no interest in intimacy or using relationship skills at all. The adaptive child is only looking out for himself or herself. Becoming aware of who's in the driver's seat is something we all need to practice on this moment-to-moment basis. So if you missed last week's episode, we highly recommend that you go back and give it a listen, as it was designed to set the foundation for today's discussion.
So imagine having a map that will show you exactly what happens to you when you're under pressure, when you're triggered. That would be useful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be good.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because those automatic behaviors are the things that are usually preventing us from truly loving well and truly being able to connect with another person.
Yeah, this is so crucial. But before we dive into the map, there's a couple of concepts that we need to talk about and understand. Both these concepts were developed by Pia Mellody. And so the first concept is self-esteem, and the second is boundaries. And while I think we know what it is, let's just discuss it. Self-esteem is how you relate to yourself, and boundaries are how you relate to others. So again, self-esteem is your relationship with yourself, specifically your capacity for self-acceptance, for loving yourself, right? Boundaries define how you relate to others. So these two concepts, how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others, are deeply interconnected.
Super, super connected. But today, we're not going to have time to go through all of that today. We're just going to really focus on understanding self-esteem at a new level. And then next week, we're going to dive into boundaries. And then probably the week after that, we're going to bring it all together and show you how to use these two concepts to be able to clearly map yourself and your partner.
Okay, so let's start with self-esteem, as it's deeply tied to our capacity for intimacy and honesty in our relationships. Self-esteem is essentially the relationship you have with yourself. Pia Mellody says that the great lie is the idea that any human being could be superior or even inferior to another human being. A healthy self-esteem is the ability to recognize that we all have our own inherent value. It's the understanding that despite our warts and imperfections and limitations, that our worth is unearned and inherent and equal to that of those around us. We are not better or less than anyone else. We are all the same.
Yeah. This is what healthy self-esteem is. It's that knowing that despite these flaws that we have this inherent value.
Yeah.
That can't be taken away. And that doesn't mean that we are always like, oh, I just think so great of myself. I just think high of myself all the time, right? We still can look at ourselves honestly and recognize that we're human, recognize that we've hurt someone or we've offended someone, and acknowledge that yes, we do make mistakes, while also holding on to the truth that our worth remains unchanged, that our weaknesses don't define our value, right? Our weakness does just speak to our humanity. The key is being able to live in this sort of paradox, right? Knowing that we have inherent worth while also being willing and able to see and self-correct our own flaws.
I love that.
Right?
I love that. Yeah.
In fact, I think that having healthy self-esteem is what helps us to, or allows us to actually be able to look at our flaws. Because when we don't have healthy self-esteem, we don't want to see it. We don't want to see where we need to grow, right? So when we have healthy self-esteem, we can see ourselves more clearly, all of our imperfections, all of our limitations, and still know that we're valuable. But no more valuable or less valuable than anybody else.
So I love that. And I think about that as kind of the concept of there's a difference between self-confidence and self-esteem. Self-confidence is knowing that I have value and I have worth, right? Self-esteem is understanding that everybody has the same value regardless of the mistakes that they make.
Right.
So we don't want you to suppress the confidence that you have, which can help you to drive and be successful. But we want you to really understand in this case that everyone has the same inherent value despite, as Charlotte mentioned, the mistakes.
Right.
I love that part.
No more, no less valuable than anyone else.
Yeah. I love the human feelings. So a healthy self-esteem is rooted in the understanding that we are all equal. And honestly, this is the foundation of democracy, right? The idea that all people are created equal. It's also a fundamental truth in many religions that God loves each of us the same, regardless of our sins or our achievements.
Right.
And I love this Irish proverb. It says, no matter how high or great the throne, what sits on it is the same as your own. So no one is superior or inferior. You may be a superior ping pong player. Like I may have just owned you in ping pong.
You'd usually
but it doesn't mean that I'm a better person.
No.
Right. And so it doesn't make me a superior human being. I'm not superior because I can wield a ping pong paddle. Rather, the case is I probably just practiced more. Right. So no one is better and no one is lesser than any other individual. And this is the definition of a healthy self-esteem, which is sort of rare to see in today's world.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a couple different extreme ends of self-esteem today. That is where most of us fall.
Yeah.
Very few of us, I think, operate from that truly healthy place.
I think it's hard to as well.
It takes work.
Yeah.
It takes growth. It takes self-confrontation. So have you ever wondered, which this kind of leads me up to this question, have you ever wondered, could you have too much self-esteem? Is it possible to have too much? And actually, yes, you can. The truth is that there's distortions in self-esteem that can go in either direction, whether that's too much self-esteem or too little self-esteem. And both ends of that spectrum are unhealthy. And I think that we're going to talk about both of them in detail today, but most of us are probably a lot more familiar with the version where there's too little self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
And Robert and I have used this terminology in many episodes, but that's what we call the one down position. So there's too little. One down position is where we have feelings of shame. We have feelings of inferiority. We might think to ourselves, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm defective in some way. Maybe I'm not lovable, or I don't deserve this, or maybe I'm just not as good as other people, right? Putting ourselves in the one down position below rather than equal to others.
Yeah, believing that you don't have the same inherent value as another individual. Yeah. Right. But there's another self-esteem disorder that doesn't get nearly enough attention. And this is the one-up version of superiority, where we look down on others, viewing other people around us as inferior. And we start to believe that we're above others and that we're entitled, we're above the rules, and that maybe the rules don't apply to me at all.
That doesn't
I'm just
apply
above
to
it
me.
all.
I can do whatever I want,
no
matter what.
Those rules are for those people.
Those people. I get to do whatever I want
Not
because I'm
evolved
better.
individuals like me.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's the hard truth. We all experience both sides.
Yeah.
We all have distortions in self-esteem, sometimes feeling too little, sometimes feeling too much. And the other word for one up is grandiosity. So everybody has both grandiosity and shame, right? Two sides of the same coin, two sides or of two opposite sides of a spectrum. Okay. Now you might tend to operate or lean more toward one side than the other side, and we'll talk about both of our tendencies as we go through this episode. But one thing is for certain, there will definitely be moments where you experience each. Okay.
If you want to watch somebody experience each, watch a teenage boy playing sports. One moment they're king, they're better than the entire team, and the next moment they don't even deserve to be on the team.
We have a teenage boy, if you can't tell.
Yeah, we have a teenage boy. It's always the same. Oh, there are even certain moments when you can experience both extremes almost simultaneously. So let me give you an example of this one, right? So have you ever known someone, or maybe you know somebody, right, who can turn from embarrassment into rage in an instant? I've met people like this, right?
I've done that myself.
Yeah. It starts with embarrassment, which is essentially the same as shame, right? And then it's like, you might think of something like, well, how could I have been so stupid? Or how could I have done that? Man, I really messed up. But then reflexively, they flip to the opposite end of the spectrum, and making this shame, they turn it right into this superiority thing, with the like, well, you made me do that. You're the idiot. Like, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. And now all of a sudden you go from feeling the one down, the shamed individual, to now I'm above you because you're the person who made me do it. And you're the one up, and you're lashing out at the other or any people around you in that situation.
Yeah. It's actually, embarrassment's a good example. But it comes up a lot. And this pattern of, feeling down, feeling shame, and then flipping it to the up, grandiosity or superiority, right? And then sort of attack the other person for making you feel that shame in the first place. That's actually the cycle behind most domestic violence. Okay. So if you look at verbal, emotional, even physical abuse, often it starts with the same trajectory where you feel inferior, flip it to superior, and then kind of attack the other person.
Now we're going to place the first piece of the puzzle on your map. So on this map, this imaginary map, I want you to draw a vertical line, right? I want you to picture a vertical line going down the center of the middle of this map. This line represents a continuum. And right in the center is this, we call it a healthy self-esteem. This is where you recognize that you're neither better or worse. You're neither more or less, and that your value is inherent and it's immutable.
So let's say that one more time. You got this vertical line going up and down. It's a continuum. It's got a circle in the middle. In that circle says healthy self-esteem. Anything above that circle, that's one up. Anything below that circle is one down.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to link to this later so you can see a visual of it. So where do these distortions in our self-esteem come from? As children, we
learn from the feet of the masters.
I love that saying that you came up with one back in a few episodes, but it's really true. We do learn from adults in our lives, and we receive a lot of messages from our environment, from different people about our self-worth.
Yeah.
Some of us grew up in households where we were constantly compared to other people, either in good ways or bad ways, right? Constantly compared. Maybe it was, you're skinnier than her. You're prettier than her. You're nicer. You're smarter than him. You're smarter than your friend, right? These kinds of comparisons, when we compare our children to others, right? It can really lead to this tendency to fall into that one-up position, believing that lie that you're superior in some way to other people.
Yeah. And I think, this is perpetuated by our parents with good intent, because we want our children to believe that they are capable of achieving anything.
Right.
So we say it's good intent, but sometimes it can backfire.
Yeah. Comparison is
comparison's a thief of joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the flip side, many of you might have received messages that made you feel defective, like something was always your fault, or that you didn't matter, or that you were unlovable.
So I have an example of that. Actually, I had a client just recently who was telling me about, he was recalling a story when he was little, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And he would always run around the house, a little boy, as boys are, a little bit destructive. And his mom was on the phone all day, every day, talking to her friends. And every time he would run by and disrupt her, she would say to the person who was on the other end of that call, that damn kid. But that has an impact on that little 5 or 6 year old.
Yeah. Yeah.
A big impact. And we carry these messages into adulthood. The belief that maybe we're meaningless, that we don't matter, that we're inferior, that we're defective, we're unlovable. And that mother, I'm sure, didn't mean that. But how does a 5-year-old interpret that?
Yeah. Then I'm not worthy of attention or
Right.
that I'm bothering.
And so now, this person might grow up to really fight these demons of shame
Yeah.
in their life.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one to shake.
Yeah, it is. But it's even harder to shake than shame in this.
I do actually.
Yeah. Is this superiority thing, the one up, right? Coming down from a one up position of grandiosity, entitlement, righteous anger, demandingness, and retaliation. That is much harder to do and much harder to let go of, right?
It's much harder. Why?
Why? Well, shame feels bad. You recognize it when you're in it. You know when you're feeling inferior or less than because you're beating yourself up and it's painful and it feels awful and you really want to escape it.
Yeah. That's shame.
That's shame. That's easy. The one down's easy to find.
Right.
Yeah.
We all know it when you're in it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But here's the tough truth about the one-up position. It actually doesn't feel bad.
No.
In fact, it often feels super good. Grandiosity feels really good. Righteous anger feels satisfying in the moment. It's the exact opposite of shame, which Robert just described, feels terrible. You want to get out of shame, but one up, that feels powerful. You feel good when you let someone have it and you just rip off at them and you think, I can say whatever I want and do whatever I want. I'm above the rules. You feel good because you believe that you are entitled, and it's tough to hear that because nobody wants to admit that about themselves. Nobody wants to see that in themselves, but those things do feel good. And because those things feel good, they're harder to change.
Yeah, that's
I don't want to come
that's
down
the addiction
from there.
that you don't want to break.
For real.
Yeah. Because there's positive reinforcement on the backside.
Right.
Yeah. At least from yourself.
But
here's the problem with it, right? It destroys everything. It destroys your marriage. It destroys your relationships. And it's caustic and harmful to everyone around you. It harms them. It's destructive. The difference between the one up and the one down is this, right? The one down is the person who feels the pain.
Right.
And the one up, everyone else feels the pain. Everyone
That's right.
around you feels the pain. Oftentimes you don't know it. You don't know that that's the case.
You don't see it.
We don't really see that our behavior is causing this pain and hurting the people that we love.
Right.
And we're blinded to it because we're operating in this distortion.
That's right. And not only does, as you just said, superiority destroy your relationship, it really does. I'm going to share an example in a second, but it impairs our judgment. And it does this in a couple of different ways. First, it prevents us from being able to feel empathy.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about in many episodes, empathy is so crucial. Like we have to be able to feel and try to understand what another person is feeling. And when we're in that one-up position of superiority and grandiosity, we are limited or incapable of feeling empathy. Second, it clouds our judgment to be able to see how our behaviors are affecting other people.
Yeah.
It clouds our ability to see negative consequences and how we might be hurting others. So I'll give you an example of this. And Robert and I have shared this story once or twice here on the podcast, but it's been a while, so I'll share it again. But this was back early on in our marriage. We've been close to 33 years now, but
yeah, about 33.
Early on, we had, as we've shared with you many times, a lot of explosive arguments and horrible conflict management. And there was this day that we were both heated, and I was especially heated, taking the one-up position, as I usually did in our arguments, and talking down to you and definitely running over fire hydrants. My 5-year-old self was out and driving the bus, taking out the fire hydrants. And Robert had just read something about how he could try maybe diffuse this conversation. I don't know if you read it in a book or something, and you said, I'm just going to tell her how I feel. So he said, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling this. I'm feeling that. And my 5-year-old self said, I don't give a crap what you feel.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. That was just one of those things, right? Like, I think I was just trying to connect on a different level. But when you think about how Charlotte explained that story, like that was the beginning of a long shutdown for me.
Long shutdown.
Like I I didn't want to talk to her about anything relating to my feelings. And for a long time, I didn't really think she cared about what my feelings were. And so I sort of used that as a lever, moving forward. So sometimes even simple things that we do from the one-up position can be very damaging to relationships.
And why I brought that up again today is just that in that moment of being in grandiosity and being one up and being superior, I wasn't even willing. I didn't have the capacity in that state to even have empathy for what he was feeling. I didn't care. And I couldn't hear it. I couldn't feel it. I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't interested in intimacy at all. And having connection with him, it was just completely selfish.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it was. And so that's my point, is that when we are in grandiosity, when we're in this one-up position, it really limits our judgment. And so, I grew up with a lot of contempt. I know what that's like to live with. I grew up in it. I bathed in it. I drank it in like Kool-Aid.
Drank the Kool-Aid.
I did. And I see how that hurts relationships. And I'm not interested in doing that anymore or feeling that way anymore. Occasionally, does it creep back in? Does it try to invite me back? Yes, absolutely, it does. But I know that I can resist that invitation. I know that when I feel that first wave of contempt, that I can take a breath, I can ground myself, I can try to get back to that place of center where I'm neither better than nor less than, but just same as.
Yeah, and that's hard.
It's taken a long time.
Yeah, and that might be and that's why this is such an important topic, because that might have been the turning point in our relationship.
It was.
Yeah,
I think it was.
Now, does it mean that the one up position is worse than the one down position? Not at all, actually. One up and one down are the same in terms of maturity. They're both equally immature. They're two sides of the same coin. Both come from the same emotional distortion. To have true intimacy in a relationship, you have to be with someone, not above them, not below them, but on equal footing.
Now, here's a really cool thought. So Dr. Terry Real had this brilliant insight into how these two, the one up and the one down, are connected. One day he asked the question, what's the emotion that's behind one up? And he realized that actually it's the same emotion as one down. They have the same common emotion. It's the same emotion that's driving the one up and the one down position. And what he realized that emotion is contempt.
Ooh.
Right? Contempt. It's just going in two different directions. Contempt is at the root of both superiority and inferiority. Okay. So when contempt is directed at someone else, it manifests as grandiosity, feeling better than, feeling superior. That's contempt that's pointed outward. But when contempt turns inward and becomes self-loathing, like I'm worthless, I'm nothing, that is contempt that is directed at the self. So either one up or one down, they're both two different versions of contempt, depending on where that contempt is being directed.
Which, as we know from the Gottman's work, is
the number one
predictor for divorce.
Right.
Ooh, how do you like that? Contempt for self could be equally as dangerous as contempt for someone else.
Right.
Oh, man. All right. So what's the takeaway from today's episode? The message is simple. We must stop all forms of contempt, because true intimacy with your partner is impossible if contempt is present. So how do we grow beyond this one up or this one down position? Well, through honest and compassionate self-confrontation. That's the only way.
Yeah, it's the only way. You have to have both. To have intimate connections with others, we have to have, as we've said today, we have to have healthy self-esteem.
Yeah.
But to have healthy self-esteem, it requires that we are willing to also look for deeper truth while also having deeper compassion, both for ourselves and for other people. So that means we can't just indulge in this idea of self-loathing, even if we've made a mistake, nor can we selfishly revel. I'm going to use the word revel because I've been there, in that place of superiority. We must be willing to face what is true about ourselves, where we are, while also being able to hold on to that compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion for ourselves, compassion for our humanity. And remember this, I love this thought, that we can't hate ourselves into growth. We can only love ourselves into becoming better.
Ooh, I like that. We can't hate ourselves into growth.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
And we're not going to self-loathe ourselves into becoming a better person. We have to be compassionate with ourselves, but we also have to be able to look at ourselves so clearly and honestly of how we're really showing up.
So hard to do. Honest and compassionate self-confrontation, that's the solution. And now let's practice this with some journaling questions. Are you ready?
We love our journaling questions.
Okay. So, and I hope you guys enjoy the journaling questions as well. Number one, take a moment to reflect on a few instances in this past week where you either gone into superiority or into inferiority. If you can't think of one, commit to paying attention this week and then ask yourself one of the following questions. What preceded this movement, up or down? Was it a thought? Was it an event? And maybe what triggered it?
Good. So then ask yourself, what was the effect of that? What effect did this have on those around you? And what effect did it have on you personally as you think back to this event or as you notice in yourself in this upcoming week?
Yeah.
And now after that, I want you to imagine it a different way. I want you to imagine one of these events differently, where you and your partner are actually on equal ground, not above, not below, but truly equal. And if you had been coming from that place of equality, how would you have engaged in that situation differently? Okay. These are important questions.
Yeah. These are critical questions because most of us don't realize that we're sort of living or residing in this one-up position until we look inside and see how we feel about the people around us. And we have to ask ourselves, do I really feel like I'm better or more superior than the people that are around me?
Right.
But I do want you to be patient with yourself as you practice this.
Yeah.
The first time you try to bring yourself out of this superiority or out of inferiority, you might be terrible at it. Maybe even the 50th time that you do it, it'll feel a little bit awkward.
Yep.
And it probably could take 100 times, especially if you're mired in one of those other ones.
Yeah, that's me.
Or even 1,000 times before it becomes second nature to ask yourself this question to sort of pull it out. But remember, your mistakes, being human, does not define your value. This is the work. Relationships are a moment-to-moment journey of evaluative evolution.
I love that word. You brought that up last week. What's it mean?
Well, it just means that as we grow or evolve in our relationship, we need to constantly evaluate our actions.
Yeah.
We need to constantly evaluate how I'm communicating, how you're hearing me, how and what position in the context of this episode that I'm taking. Am I superior? Am I inferior? Do I find worth in you as as my partner?
Yeah. I love that. Am I taking the time to evaluate, to observe what I just did, to evaluate whether that's living true to my best self?
Right.
And if not, what am I going to do better next time?
How do I evolve based on that information?
Right.
Yeah.
So back to the question we started with at the beginning of this episode. Is it true that you can't love another unless you love yourself? Well, the answer is yes. The reason why is because you cannot be intimate from the one down shame position because you're too preoccupied with yourself and the ways in which you're not valuable. And you cannot be intimate or empathetic from the one up superior position because you're too selfish. Or in my case, I was too selfish, too entitled.
In order to love well, we must learn to be deeply connected. Deep connection relies on the equality of your position, neither one up or one down. In the absence of that, there will always be something in the way of that connection.
So I actually have created a visual to help you see, visually what we talked about today with this self-esteem dynamic. And you can find a link to that in the show notes. And then next week, we're going to complete this conversation by talking about boundaries, and we're going to put the other part of the map together for you. But until then,
thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for each and every one of you. And we kindly ask, if you haven't yet, please leave a comment and a 5-star review. It really helps us make a greater impact and help more couples each day. And if you know someone who might be in need of or interested in this episode, please consider sharing it.
And be kind to each other this week. Take care of each other. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest impact.